Hi there. Today we're going to show you the best way to seal your comic books. Of course, there isn't a substitute for encapsulating your comic book. However, here's a better method on how to air seal and have added support for your comic books for long time storage. Here's what you will need. Some clear tape, a pair of scissors, the comic you want to seal, the poly bag, and the backboard, whatever brands of poly bag and backboard you prefer. Now there are two methods on how to do this. One, there's a single board method. Two, there's a double backboard method. First, we'll be going over the single board method. Now for the purpose of this video, I'm going to use a visible tape. That way you can see exactly where I'm taping. Now this method takes a little bit of practice to do before you get real better at it. And so of course we're going to go with the single board method. Now it doesn't really matter what side of the backboard you want to put your comic on. I use the glossy side. That way I can mark the front of the backboard in case if I need to. So, of course, you'll take your comic book, place it over the backboard. Now, I prefer to insert the comic in a poly bag upside down, because if you don't, then when you store your comic, you'll see where all the tape is at, and it just looks not cool. So you pick up your book, insert one corner in gently, that way you don't damage the comic. And there you go. Now flip the comic around and get your tape. Like I said, I'll be using this kind. Get you a small piece and the poly bag, flap it over and secure the flap. There you go. Now, here's where you start air sealing it. Of course, you get your tape, cut off a longer strip, enough to kind of go over the comic book on both sides. Now, where the flap is ended, and kind of where you tape that in the beginning, that's where you want to place the strip of tape. Of course, seal it down. Now be careful not to damage your comic when you're flipping back and forth. So gently pick it up, flip it over, and take the two ends and seal them down. Of course, you'll be using the clear tape so you won't see this on your comic. Alright, now gently flip the comic back over. Take your tape and cut off about 1.5 inches of tape. Now, here's the tricky parts. You're going to place the tape along the edge of each side of the comic, where the gaps are at. That's where air gets through. So start on the tape, place half of this tape over the comic bag and half enough to where it kind of goes off the poly bag a little as well. You can see this. Now flip the comic over, take the other side of the tape and seal it on front of the comic. Now right here is when you want to make sure you get a good pinch. You want to get a good seal. See that? That way it keeps any air from entering into the comic. Now, for the other side, of course, inch and a half of tape, and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, now flip the comic back around, and here's the tricky part. You want to get the air out of the comic. You still have this flap open right here where air can get pushed out at. So gently secure the comic, and you want to start here and kind of just slightly drag your hand along and push any of the air out. Now when it gets about the end of your comic, keep your hand right there. That way no air gets sucked back in. You want to seal your comic off. And again, make sure you pinch the corners. That way no air gets back in. There you go. The comic has less air inside, if any, and plus it kind of gives it a smoother finish, because I know in time that the poly bags, they kind of like to ripple a little bit. So, but now your comic is air sealed, and it looks nice and flat. All right, now to make it pretty, what you're going to do is grab your scissors and cut off, not all of it, but just some of the excess tape, enough to where it stays sealed. And of course, you grab your tape and get you some smaller pieces of tape, about another inch. Place the tape right at the edge of the comic, not over it, just right at the edge. And then bring the tape over to secure the tape that has been pinched off. There you go. And of course, get you another piece of tape and do the same thing to the other side. Now your comic is completely sealed off from any air. And again, like I said, it gives it a nicer, smoother finish. And it just looks great to me. So, with that being said, when you have real tape on it, or clear tape I should say, it looks like this. You can barely see it. But no air gets inside, and your comic looks real smooth and flat. This makes it look good. Now here's the double backboard method, like I showed you earlier in the video. Now to me, this is if you want to store your comic in the comic long boxes and just have them sitting and just saving for years down the road, or whatever the case may be. So of course you'll need the comic you want to seal. An extra backboard, and of course your poly bag. So what you're going to do is of course place your comic on one of the backboards. Like I said, it doesn't matter what side you want, glossy side or dull side. Your poly bag, and do the same way like we did with the single backboard method. Comic bag upside down and gently insert the comic in the poly. And careful with the corners. Now, barely insert the comic in. Take the other backboard. Now it doesn't matter what side, the glossy or the dull. Open the flap. Put the backboard in. Careful with the corner. You might have to slightly bend the backboard just a little bit. Like I said, this takes practice. That's why I have my hand secured on the comic. That way it doesn't move. And put the backboard in. There it is. You have both backboards inside the comic bag. Now this one takes a little finesse because sometimes the poly bag would get caught on the corners. Like I said, it depends what brand you use. Some brands are slightly larger but I like to use Ultra Pro because it's to me it's smoother and it gives it a more of a tight look. All right, you take your comic and of course continue to insert it into the sleeve gently because it is thicker now because of the double backboards. All the way through. There you go. Both sides. Now, the reason why the double backboard method is because if you're having your comic stored for a long time in boxes, using the single method, in time it might, develop spinal rolls. Depends on where you store it. If you store it near a window, UV rays might get onto it. And if you're picky on comics like me, you want them to keep, the 9.8 average on these things. You want to keep them in the best condition possible. So if I have my comics inside the storage box for years to come, I use the double method because it keeps the front, not only the back, but it keeps the front safe as well. All right, so now that we got the double backboard in, we're going to seal the comic the same way we did using the single method. Get your tape. Oh man, where's it at? And you seal your comic. And you're going to do it the same way, like I said, you're going to do the same way we did it the single method. And there you have it. The reason why I like to put my comic on the waxy side is because to me the dull side, it's better to mark the comic if you need to. That way you know that, hey, that this is this comic book without taking the backboards out and possibly damaging your comic. And of course, you have your sealed comic in the long boxes. Now for the single method, it looks nice, and I like to put the ones that I like to show in, the top loaders. Like this comic has been sealed using the single method, so it's airtight and it's inside this top loader, and it just makes it look really nice. And that's it. This is how you can air seal your comics, and they last for a while. I mean, I put this one in 2015 and it's still great. Now the reason why I use the double method as well is because in time it gives that comic the pressed look, which makes it look nice. Don't forget to change out your backboards and your poly bags every 3 years plus, because they contain acidities that might yellow your comic in the long run. But this is to reduce comic fading, comic yellowing, moisture getting inside, bugs that like to eat paper. And to me, this is an awesome way to seal your comics rather than just the single tape, because air gets inside and dust and bugs and who else knows what. But as long as you have your comic completely sealed, even on the edges, it's harder for dust, moisture, bugs to get inside and possibly ruin your comic. And there you have it. Thank you for watching.